The Arby sat just off the highway, one of those anonymous roadside stops that smelled permanently of fried oil and sweet roast beef. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing everything in a pale glow that made time feel suspended. It was early evening, the hour when families stopped on their way home, when truckers refueled themselves as routinely as their rigs. Nothing about the place suggested conflict. Nothing suggested history was about to collide with the present. The Johnson family had chosen the booth near the window. Marcus Johnson sat with his back straight, habit drilled into him by a lifetime of being watched more closely than others. He was 43, broad-shouldered, with hands that bore the calluses of a man who had worked for everything he owned. Across from him sat his wife, Renee, calm and observant, her eyes always moving, always measuring the room without appearing to. Between them were their children, 16-year-old Isaiah, tall and restless, and 9-year-old Nia, swinging her legs under the table, dipping fries in his sauce with serious concentration. It was supposed to be an ordinary dinner. Just food, conversation, laughter about school and work. Marcus had insisted on eating out because it was Friday and because he believed, stubbornly, in claiming normalcy. He believed that doing everyday things without fear was itself an act of quiet resistance. They were halfway through their meal when the door opened. At first, it was just a change in the air, a subtle shift in noise, a brief lull in conversation around the room. Two police officers stepped inside, boots heavy against the tile. Their uniforms were dark, rigid, authoritative. The badges on their chests caught the light. They didn't look around casually. Their eyes scanned, sharp and purposeful, lingering longer than necessary. Marcus noticed immediately. He always did. Renee felt it too. She straightened slightly, her hand instinctively moving closer to Nia's. Isaiah noticed the change in his parents before he noticed the officers themselves. He followed their gaze, his jaw tightening. The officers didn't approach the counter. They didn't order food. They walked slowly through the dining area, past booths and tables, past white families who barely glanced up. Then they stopped, right beside the Johnsons' booth. "Evening," one of them said. His voice was flat, practiced, not unfriendly, not warm either. Neutral, the way authority often pretends to be. "Evening," Marcus replied, steady and polite. The officer's eyes dropped to the table, to the wrappers, the cups, the children. "We got a call," the second officer said. Younger, sharper. His hand rested near his belt. Someone reported a disturbance. Marcus blinked once. "A disturbance?" "Yes, sir," the first officer said. Said there was a family causing a scene. Renee's lips pressed together. Isaiah's foot stopped bouncing. Nia froze mid-bite. Marcus looked around. The restaurant was quiet. Conversations continued in low murmurs. No one was watching openly, but Marcus knew they were listening. "We've been sitting here eating," Marcus said. "Haven't raised our voices. Haven't bothered anyone." The younger officer tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether Marcus's words deserve belief. "Mind telling us why someone would call us about you, then?" The word you hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Renee spoke before Marcus could respond. "Officer, is there a problem? Because our kids are hungry, and we're just trying to finish dinner." The older officer's eyes flicked to her, then back to Marcus. "Ma'am, we'll decide if there's a problem." Isaiah's fists clenched under the table. Marcus noticed and placed his hand gently on his son's knee, a silent command. "Not now." "Am I being detained?" Marcus asked. The question was calm, precise, not confrontational. The younger officer's expression shifted just slightly. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you're questioning me," Marcus replied. "In a restaurant, in front of my family." The older officer stepped closer. "Too close. You need to relax," he said. "We're just trying to figure out what's going on." Marcus inhaled slowly. He knew the script. He had learned it not from television or social media, but from experience, from his father's warnings, from his own mistakes when he was younger and less careful with his words. "We're relaxed," Marcus said. "We're eating dinner." Silence stretched. Somewhere behind them, a soda machine hissed. "Can I see some ID?" the younger officer asked. Renee looked up sharply. "For what reason?" "Ma'am," the officer said, irritation creeping into his tone. This doesn't concern you. She's my wife, Marcus said, and this concerns all of us. The older officer sighed theatrically. Look, sir, if you cooperate, this will be quick. If you don't, you're making it difficult. Marcus met his gaze. Difficult for who? That's when a shift happened. Not loud, not dramatic, just a tightening around the eyes. A subtle change in posture. The kind of change that said the officers were no longer here to investigate a call. They were here to assert control. Stand up, the younger officer ordered. Isaiah half rose from his seat, anger flashing across his face. Don't talk to my dad like that. Marcus's hand shot up. Isaiah, sit. His son obeyed, reluctantly. I'm not standing up, Marcus said evenly. You haven't told me what law I've broken. The older officer's voice dropped. Last warning. Renee felt her heart pounding. She reached for her phone instinctively, then hesitated. She knew what recording could do. She also knew what it could provoke. Marcus noticed her hesitation and gave the slightest nod. She began recording. The younger officer saw it and sneered. You think that's going to help you? I think it's my right, Renee replied. The officer turned back to Marcus. Sir, step out of the booth. Now. Marcus looked at his children, at Nia's wide, frightened eyes, at Isaiah's clenched jaw. Then he did something the officers did not expect. He smiled, not mocking, not smug, calm, controlled. No, Marcus said, but I'll tell you what I will do. Both officers stiffened. I will sit here, Marcus continued, his voice steady enough to cut through the tension, and I will finish my dinner with my family. If you believe I've committed a crime, you're welcome to explain it. If not, you're interfering with a private citizen's lawful activity. The room had gone quiet now. Heads turned. Someone whispered. The older officer's face reddened. You think you're smarter than us? I think I know my rights, Marcus said. That was when a manager appeared from behind the counter, nervous and sweating. Officers? Is everything okay? The younger officer pointed at Marcus. This man's being uncooperative. Marcus turned slightly toward the manager. Sir, did anyone here complain about us? The manager hesitated. He glanced at the officers, then at the family. No, he admitted. I didn't get any complaints. The older officer shot him a look. We got a call. The manager swallowed. From who? Silence. The weight of that silence pressed down on the room, thick and undeniable. Marcus leaned back slightly, never breaking eye contact with the officers. So, he said quietly, what's this really about? Neither officer answered. And that's when Marcus made his next move, one that would change the entire night. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, not just for the officers, but for everyone within earshot. The manager shifted his weight, clearly wishing he could disappear behind the counter again. A couple in the next booth pretended to focus on their food, though their attention was unmistakably fixed on the confrontation. Marcus broke the silence, not by raising his voice, but by lowering it. You walked in here, he said, measured and deliberate, and you singled out my family without evidence, without a complaint from this establishment, and without telling me what law I supposedly violated. So again, what is this really about? The younger officer scoffed. You're getting real mouthy for someone who... Finish that sentence. Marcus interrupted, his tone calm but unyielding. The officer stopped himself. His jaw tightened. He glanced at his partner, then back at Marcus. Renee's phone was still recording. She hadn't said a word since starting the video, but her silence was strategic. She knew better than to escalate emotionally. Let them talk. Let them explain themselves on camera. The older officer cleared his throat. Sir, we received a call reporting suspicious behavior. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Suspicious how? Another pause. Isaiah leaned forward slightly. What's suspicious about eating sandwiches? The older officer shot him a look. Stay out of this, kid. Marcus's head snapped toward the officer, his calm finally edged with steel. You don't talk to my son like that. The officer bristled. You don't tell me how to do my job. Then do it properly, Marcus replied. Because right now, you're failing. The word failing landed hard. Around them, phones were coming out now. Not just Renee's. A man near the soda machine lifted his device discreetly. Someone else angled theirs from across the room. The atmosphere had shifted. The officers could feel it. Authority thrives in isolation. Scrutiny weakens it. The manager spoke again, voice trembling. Officers, if there's no issue, I'd really appreciate if. The younger officer rounded on him. Sir, are you refusing to cooperate with law enforcement? The manager froze. No, I know, sir. Marcus leaned back, folding his hands on the table. You see the problem? He said calmly. You intimidate everyone in the room, then call it cooperation. The older officer exhaled sharply through his nose. All right, let's reset. Good idea, Marcus said. You go first. The officer ignored the remark. Sir, do you have any weapons on you? Marcus didn't hesitate. No. Mind if we search you? Yes, Marcus replied instantly. I mind. The younger officer laughed without humor. You've got something to hide? Marcus met his gaze. My dignity. Renee felt a surge of pride and fear. She knew how thin the line was between standing firm and being labeled a threat. The older officer's voice dropped again. Last chance to cooperate. Marcus leaned forward slightly, just enough to be unmistakably intentional. Officer, listen to me carefully. You have no probable cause, no complaint from this business, no reasonable suspicion. If you touch me, detain me, or remove my family without lawful justification, you are violating my rights. And unlike you, I'm documenting everything. The younger officer took a step forward, and then something unexpected happened. A woman from a nearby table stood up, middle-aged, white, nervous but determined. Excuse me, she said, voice shaking. They really haven't done anything. They've been quiet the whole time. The officers turned, surprised. Another voice joined in. Yeah, a man added. We were here before them. No disturbance. The room shifted again. The unspoken rule, don't get involved, had been broken. The older officer raised his hands slightly. Everyone just relax. Marcus nodded. We are. The younger officer muttered under his breath, clearly irritated. He leaned toward his partner and whispered something Marcus couldn't hear, but the tone was unmistakable. Retreat masked as restraint. The older officer straightened, forcing a neutral expression. Sir, he said to Marcus, we're going to let this go. But next time. There won't be a next time, Marcus said quietly. Not like this. The officer opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. He glanced around at the phones, the witnesses, the manager. He knew when the ground was no longer solid beneath his feet. Enjoy your meal, he said stiffly. The officers turned and walked out. The door closed behind them with a soft chime. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room exhaled. Nia looked up at her father, eyes wide. Daddy, were they mad at us? Marcus's chest tightened. He forced a gentle smile. No, baby. They were just confused. Isaiah shook his head. That wasn't confusion. Marcus looked at his son, really looked at him. I know. Renee lowered her phone, hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. You okay? She asked Marcus quietly. He nodded. I am. But this isn't over. Outside, through the window, Marcus watched the patrol car idle for a moment longer than necessary before pulling away. He knew better than to believe this encounter ended at the door. Because some nights don't end when the uniforms leave. They follow you. The relief inside the Arby's was fragile, like glass that might shatter if handled too roughly. Conversations resumed, but quieter now, edged with awareness. The Johnsons sat still for a moment, none of them touching their food. Marcus was the first to move. He reached for his drink, took a slow sip, then set it down carefully. His hands were steady, but his mind was not. He had won the moment, but moments like that had consequences. Renee leaned closer to him. You felt that too, didn't you? He nodded once. They didn't leave because they understood. They left because they were watched. Isaiah looked toward the door. You think they're coming back? Not here, Marcus said. Not tonight. That's not comforting, Isaiah replied. Marcus met his son's eyes. It's honest. The manager approached again, voice low. Sir, I'm really sorry about that. That shouldn't have happened. Marcus studied him for a second, but it did. The manager swallowed. Your meals are on the house. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. The The man walked away, visibly shaken. They finished eating in silence. Nia pushed her last fry aside, appetite gone. Isaiah kept scanning the windows. Renee remained alert, phone still in her hand, videos saved, backed up, ready. When they stood to leave, Marcus paused. He looked around the restaurant, not with anger, but with intention. Several people avoided his eyes. A few nodded subtly. One woman mouthed, "Thank you." Marcus didn't respond. He simply led his family toward the door. Outside, the night air felt heavier than before. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the pavement. Their car sat near the edge of the lot. Marcus unlocked the doors. Everyone in. Calm. Normal. They did as instructed. The engine turned over. Marcus checked his mirrors out of habit, then again with purpose. Red and blue lights flared to life behind them. Isaiah sucked in a sharp breath. "Dad, I see it," Marcus said calmly, pulling the car to a stop before the siren even sounded. Everyone breathed. The patrol car rolled up behind them. Same officers. Renee's heart sank. Of course. Marcus turned slightly. "Recording?" Renee nodded and raised her phone. The officers stepped out, slower this time. More deliberate. The younger one approached the driver's side. "Sir, we need to talk." Marcus lowered his window halfway. "About what?" "You left the restaurant," the officer said. "Yes," Marcus replied. "That tends to happen after dinner." The officer ignored the comment. "We're following up." "On what?" Marcus asked. "You told us you were letting it go." The older officer stepped up beside his partner. "Sir, your attitude earlier raised concerns." Marcus smiled faintly. "My attitude isn't a crime." The younger officer leaned closer. "Step out of the vehicle." "No," Marcus said. Isaiah stiffened. Nia clutched Renee's arm. "Sir," the officer snapped, "don't make this worse." Marcus's voice remained level. "I'm in my vehicle. With my family. You have no lawful reason to remove me." The older officer's jaw clenched. "You think you want something back there?" "I think you embarrassed yourselves," Marcus said. "And now you're trying to regain control." Silence again. Heavy. Dangerous. "License and registration," the younger officer said sharply. Marcus handed them over without comment. The officer took them, walked back to the patrol car. Minutes passed. "Too many," Isaiah whispered. "They're looking for something." "I know," Marcus replied. The officers returned. The older one spoke this time. "Sir, we're issuing you a warning." "For what?" "Improper display of hostility toward law enforcement." Marcus almost laughed, but didn't. "That's not a violation." "It is when it interferes with an investigation," the officer replied. Marcus nodded slowly, then put it in writing. The officer hesitated. He hadn't expected that. "Go ahead," Marcus continued. "Document it." "Because I will." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. He leaned toward his partner again, whispering. Finally, the older officer handed back the documents. "You're free to go." Marcus didn't move immediately. He looked at the officer, eyes steady. "You followed us because you didn't like being challenged." The officer stiffened. "Drive safe." Marcus pulled away. Only when the patrol car disappeared did the tension inside the vehicle finally crack. Renee exhaled shakily. "Jesus." Isaiah slammed his fist lightly against the door. "They hate that you didn't back down." Marcus nodded. "That's why you never do it emotionally. You do it clean, calm, on record." Nia looked up, voice small. "Daddy, were you scared?" Marcus glanced at her in the mirror. "Yes, but he didn't say that." "A little," he said instead. "But fear doesn't mean you're wrong." They drove home in silence. Later that night, long after the kids were asleep, Marcus and Renee sat at the kitchen table. Renee replayed the video, watching the officers' faces, listening to the words, the pauses, the threats disguised as questions. "This is going to blow up," Renee said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Good." She looked at him. "You sure?" He met her gaze. "If it doesn't, it happens again. To someone else. Maybe someone who doesn't know what to say." Renee reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Outside, a patrol car rolled slowly down the street, then passed on. Marcus watched through the window, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he had done. Because standing your ground doesn't end a story. It starts one. By morning, the video was already spreading. Renee hadn't even finished her coffee when her phone began vibrating nonstop. Messages stacked on top of each other. Friends, co-workers, numbers she didn't recognize. Someone had clipped the confrontation inside the Arby's. Someone else had uploaded the parking lot stop. The algorithm did the rest. Marcus watched silently from the kitchen doorway as Renee scrolled. "They're calling it racist cops harass family at dinner," she said. "It's already passed 50,000 views." Marcus nodded. "That was fast." "It's not just fast," Renee said. "It's angry." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down. "Good. Anger is attention. Attention is accountability." By noon, a local journalist had emailed. By mid-afternoon, a civil rights attorney left a voicemail. By evening, the police department released a carefully worded statement claiming the officers were responding to a citizen concern and that no misconduct had been established. Marcus read it once. Then again. "They're lying," Isaiah said, reading over his shoulder. "And everyone knows it." Marcus looked at his son. Knowing isn't enough. Proving is. That night, a patrol car drove past the house again. Slower this time. The message was subtle but unmistakable. "We know where you live." Renee felt it immediately. "They're trying to intimidate us." Marcus nodded. "They always do." "What they come back?" Nia asked softly. Marcus knelt in front of her. "Then we handle it the same way. Calm. Smart. Together." But even as he said it, Marcus understood the truth most people never want to face. When you challenge authority publicly, the system doesn't collapse. It pushes back. The next day, Internal Affairs called. The officer on the line sounded professional. Neutral. "Mr. Johnson, we'd like you to come in and give a statement." Marcus smiled faintly. "I already did. On video." There was a pause. "In person, sir." "I'll bring my attorney," Marcus replied. Another pause, longer this time. "That won't be necessary." "Yes," Marcus said, "it will." The meeting happened 3 days later. A gray room, a metal table, 2 investigators who pretended not to see color, bias, or power. Marcus answered every question without emotion, without exaggeration. He let the video do the talking. When it ended, one of the investigators finally looked uncomfortable. "We'll be reviewing officer conduct," he said. Marcus stood. "You should." Outside the building, a crowd had gathered. Not large, but loud enough. Signs. Phones. Cameras. Isaiah stared, stunned. "This is because of us." Marcus corrected him. "This is because of them." 2 weeks later, the department announced the officers had been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. Online, people called it a victory. Marcus didn't, because he knew how these stories usually ended. But this one didn't end quietly. The restaurant chain released a public apology. The city council demanded answers. Body cam footage surfaced, edited, incomplete, but damaging enough. And then came the final announcement. Both officers were terminated. No reassignment. No quiet transfer. Terminated. Marcus read the notice twice. Renee exhaled. It actually happened. Marcus nodded slowly. Because we didn't back down. That night, the family returned to the same Arby's. Same booth. Same lights. Only this time, no one watched them like they didn't belong. Isaiah smiled to himself. Feels different. Marcus looked around, then at his children. That's what accountability looks like. They ate in peace. And for once, peace stayed. The quiet after victory was unfamiliar. Marcus noticed it first in the mornings. No patrol car creeping past the house. No sudden slowing of engines. No weight pressing on his chest when he stepped outside to check the mail. The neighborhood looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Something had shifted, not in the world, but in him. Isaiah felt it too. At school, people who barely knew him before now nodded in the hallways. A teacher pulled him aside and said, carefully, "Your father showed a lot of courage." Isaiah didn't know how to respond. He just nodded, the word courage sitting uneasily in his mind. It hadn't felt brave watching his dad face down armed men. It had felt terrifying. Nia processed it differently. She asked questions at night, soft ones, the kind children ask when they're trying to understand danger without being swallowed by it. Are there bad cops everywhere? Why did they think we were bad? Marcus answered honestly, but gently. He never lied. He never let fear become the lesson. Renee, however, carried the heaviest burden. She was the one who had pressed record, the one who uploaded the video, the one whose phone had turned an ordinary dinner into a public reckoning. Some nights, she replayed it, not because she needed to, but because part of her still couldn't believe how close they had come to disaster. One wrong word, one raised voice, one officer deciding ego mattered more than restraint. Marcus would sit beside her, saying nothing. They both knew this wasn't about heroism. It was about survival done correctly. Weeks passed, then months. The story faded from headlines, replaced by newer outrage, newer scandals. That was how the system worked. Memory was short, consequences shorter. But something lasting remained beneath the surface. The department quietly updated its training procedures. The city implemented new guidelines for citizen encounters. None of it was framed as because of the Johnson family. Marcus didn't care. Change didn't need his name attached to it. One evening, Marcus was invited to speak, not at a rally, not on television, but at a small community meeting. A church basement, folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, ordinary people. He stood at the front, hands clasped, and spoke plainly. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he said. "I did what I was forced to learn. I stayed calm. I asked questions. I documented everything. I didn't give them what they wanted, fear or anger." A man in the audience asked, "What if they'd arrested you anyway?" Marcus nodded. "That's the risk. Always has been. But silence carries its own risk too." Another voice asked, "Were you scared?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes. Anyone who tells you they weren't is lying." He paused, letting that land. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he continued. "It's refusing to let fear make your decisions for you." After the meeting, a young father approached him. Nervous, grateful. "Because of you," the man said, "I know what to do if it happens to me." Marcus drove home in silence that night, the road stretching ahead, familiar and unthreatening. He realized something then, something subtle but profound. The officers had tried to reduce him to a moment, a suspect, a problem, a lesson in obedience. Instead, that moment had exposed them. Power without accountability collapses the instant it's seen clearly. At home, Renee was already asleep. Isaiah was in his room, headphones on, planning a future that felt slightly less constrained. Nia slept peacefully, clutching a stuffed animal, the memory already softening at the edges. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching them, and finally allowed himself to feel the weight lift. Not because justice had been perfect, not because the system was suddenly fair, but because, this time, it hadn't one. He turned off the lights, and for the first time since that night at Arby's, Marcus slept without rehearsing conversations in his head. The story didn't end with applause. It ended with something better. Normalcy, claimed, defended, and kept.